Hello and welcome to my first monthly review. This is for December 2019. I actually recorded this episode earlier today and I noticed for some reason my video and audio started lagging and I'm not sure why. So I decided to re-record it. If it still happens again and my things get out of sync, oh well, I'm going to have to dig in further and find out why things are not syncing up, so to speak. But in any event, I figured I'd give it a second round anyway, just because this is the first time I've done this, and wanted to get a little bit more practice in, so to speak. So, I'm going to go through some books I've read, some movies I've watched, and something I just built over the holidays. So the first one, let me get that one out here, and it is called Wintering. I can't actually see the title. Wintering. It's from Peter Gay or Guy. I'm not sure if I'm saying the last name right. But the author is actually, I believe, from Minnesota. I'm not sure if it says in the back here where. I should just put my glasses on. But in any event, I do believe he lives in Minnesota. So the book is basically about an old man who I think is suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that. And he leaves the home that he's in, and they think he's basically trying to recreate a trip that he did with his son when his son was 18 years old. Not sure about that though, but this causes the son to relive some memories he had about this trip that he took with his father. And you start finding out all these different background stories about people that lived in this small town that they lived in. And it starts to unravel and unweave some of the people that were involved in this trip of why they went out into the northern part of Minnesota and basically lived off the land just by themselves, nobody else around them. So it's a good book. It's an interesting story. I think it's written well. It isn't one of the most exciting stories I've ever read, and that sounds odd because there are definitely some tense moments in the book. But it's not a bad book by any means. Definitely something that is interesting to pick up. So it's also, I believe, if I remember from his website, that it's a book that he has other books that, I don't want to say it's in the same universe, because that is kind of like what you talk about with science fiction or fantasy books, but I think it has the same characters, or it's kind of in the same story timeline, so to speak. So in any event, it's a decent book. If you find it, I'm not saying definitely recommend it, but it's one that if you find, hey, pick it up and read it. It's a good story. Okay. The next one is a movie called Ad Astra. And this is one that came out this year. It stars Brad Pitt. He is basically the son of a famous astronaut, Tommy Lee Jones, who went out onto a deep space exploring mission out on near the orbit of Neptune, in fact, orbiting Neptune, to do research on finding extraterrestrial life that far out. The instruments can be much more sensitive or something like that. The mission is a bust. They lose contact with him and the crew. Haven't heard from him in years. Jump to the present. There are these electrical storms that are going on out of nowhere, and these weird events that they believe might be related to the engine that was on the ship that Jones was on, and they think he might have actually lived all this time. And they want Brad to transmit a message to his father in the hopes that he's still alive. And he has to go to Mars to do this for some reason. So in this near future, we are actually on the moon and on Mars, and he can't actually transmit the message from Earth directly. He has to go to the moon and then to Mars, and then from there he actually speaks and sends a message. That kind of bothered me because it didn't make a lot of sense to me. So the movie, it's sad for me to say, but it just did not do it for me. And I say that because I love space. I love astronomy. I think they do a really good job of representing the physics of things. It's not perfect. When they're on Mars and the moon, they don't show gravity the way it would be, though when they're in space, they show them weightless. When they're on the moon and on their rovers, they kind of show it bouncing around a little bit more, it gives it the feeling that it might be a little bit, lighter, so to speak. But they definitely don't do that when they're walking around on the moon or like in structures in the moon and Mars. So I felt that was kind of, I didn't really care for that. That was a little bothersome. But the real problem was just the story. It feels like it's trying to be cerebral, philosophical, and it just doesn't do that for me. It just didn't make sense. I was trying to find something of meaning in the story and what was going on. There's a couple of interesting points, but I just can't recommend it. I really, really can't, and that's sad because I think Brad does a good job of acting. I think the effects are great. I think visuals are great. The story just didn't grab me. So, the next review are actually two books. These are the second and third in a trilogy. So I'll just put them up here. And they're called The Book of Etta, this one, and The Book of Flora. The first book I read a couple months ago, The Book of the Unnamed Midwife, is really good. I highly recommend that one. It kind of sets off this post-apocalyptic world where this disease is killing off lots of people. I think even more women than men. Childbirth. Most babies are born stillborn. Women die during childbirth. And the main character is a woman. I think she's actually a midwife, or at least a nurse. She contracts the disease, but she is one of the few that's able to actually fight it off. She wakes up in a hospital after, fighting this illness, and kind of a little disoriented as to what's been going on in the world. Quickly discovers that women are targeted for violent crimes because there's hardly any women around, and there's really hardly any people around anymore. She starts to disguise herself as a man, and tries to bulk up a little bit, do more physical exertion, and cuts her hair short and stuff. It tries to basically pass herself off as a guy. And that book was actually, I really, really enjoyed it. It's called The Book of the Unnamed Midwife because she starts journaling. It never gives her name, so you don't know her name, unnamed. And this is continued on with these other two books with different characters, like 100 years, I believe, after the events of the first book. The second and third are good, but they didn't grab me as much as the first one did. That's not to say they're bad. It's just I felt the first one set a very high bar, and the second and third ones didn't quite reach it. They also felt rushed at the end. I felt like the story and the writing was pretty good in keeping the pacing going, and then at the end, I just felt some things were just rushed to tie them all together, so to speak. And that just didn't, I don't want to say sit well with me, but it was something that I thought was done better in the first book. So I would definitely recommend reading the first book, and you could stop there. You don't have to read the other two. That's not to say don't, but they just didn't get me. They didn't seem to do as much for me as the first one did. Okay. The next one I want to review is a movie, though I actually have the book here, The Girl with All the Gifts. I will occasionally make a stupid mistake because I like buying a lot of books. And you'd think I'd be smarter with buying online, that I'd go, oh, I already bought this one. But occasionally I screw up and I forget that I have already bought one. So that's on my pile to either give away to somebody or donate to my employer's local library in the they have in one of the, not cafeterias, but break room. and they have like a little library in there. So I sometimes throw in my duplicates that I occasionally screw up on. So apparently this book and the script were written around the same time. The book actually has like 5 main characters. The movie focuses on the one. It's a a zombie outbreak, but there are some kids that are not immune, but live with the disease. It's a fungal disease, and exhibit just straightforward human characteristics unless they smell a human, and then the parasite fungal infection takes over, and then they act like what they call them as hungries. So it's a great movie. I really liked it, really enjoyed it. The last end, not the last ending, but the ending is sad, a little disturbing, kind of weird, a little funny in a way, sort of. But don't want to give anything away. I'm also debating, do I do a lot of spoilers or not when I do these reviews, but I'm going to try to keep them a little spoiler free if I can, and if I want to get into something, I'll at least warn people. But in any event, it's a really good movie. Really enjoyed it. Thought it was done very well. Really liked the main character. I don't remember the actress's name, but the one who plays the main Hungry's girl. She's great. I thought she did a really good job. So definitely recommend that. Yes, it's a zombie movie, but there's more to it, from my opinion, than just that. Definitely has some scary moments. Definitely has some gory moments, but yeah, definitely recommend it. Take it if you get a chance. I would definitely recommend watching it. I'm going to be going on kind of a post-apocalyptic zombie kick. For a little while with some of the things I have, including this book. This is called "This Is Not a Test" from Courtney Summers. Apparently, this is what they call young adult. I didn't quite realize that. I don't really care. My kids have been reading. We've always encouraged them to read a lot, and we keep pushing them to read more and more and more. So they've read a lot of like young adult stuff, along with books that I recommended them to read as well. And there's just kind of it's a little bit easier to read. So I blasted through this book in like a couple days. It's a zombie outbreak, but what's interesting, so it's a zombie outbreak, and it ends up where 6 teenagers end up barricading themselves and holding themselves up in the high school. Okay. The main character, I think, is what makes this book good. It's a girl who is in a family where the father is abusive, and her older sister, who she thought they would run away together to get away from this, her older sister just leaves before all this happens, and she's severely depressed to the point of being suicidal. So then this happens. So I thought the way that the author wrote the character and the situation is a very interesting relationship. You don't want to live, and yet now humanity is like literally falling apart. So I thought that is what to me made the book. The other characters, they really didn't do it much for me. They felt a little one-dimensional, but the main character, I thought, really brought a great dynamic and in a sad kind of approach to the whole thing, but it was a different voice, and the one that's I'm not really seen in a book kind of like this. So that I thought was done really well. So This Is Not a Test. The next one is going to be hard to show. Hold on a second, because I really don't want to break it, but I'm going to zoom it by. If I'm going to zoom it by, I got it. Oh, I'm actually breaking it already. This thing I do not want to drop. There you go. So it's going by you right now. And there you go. So how'd you like that? That was the UNSC Infinity. So if you are a Halo fan, you know what that is. That was the ship in the 4th game. So my family, this is the plans. Okay. huge plans to build this thing, over 2,000 pieces. I grew up as a kid playing with Legos, and then you get older, it's like, oh, you can't play with toys. You're getting older. You can't do that. And then you get kids, they start playing with some toys. They're like, oh, this is kind of fun. And in a way, this isn't Lego. This is actually Mega Bloks. But putting these together is almost like building a model. It is building a model. And it was really a lot of fun to do this. My kids would sit down with me in my office. When I was building it, sometimes they would say, hey, because they would ask, could I do a bag or two? I'd be like, yeah, sure. What do I mean by that? Well, this is such a huge set. If you look that way, on my amplifier is the elephant from Halo. My family got that for me, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. I built it. Then my kids got a hold of it. They were a little younger, and they started playing with it, and they actually broke it. Whatever. It happens. Well, they felt a little bad about that. So they gathered up all the pieces, at least all the ones they thought they could find, and it's been sitting on my table over here, all sorted, but I was missing some. And so I kind of just left it sit there, and I finally said, I got to get rid of this. I got to get this off of my table. So I built it as best as I can. It's not perfect. There's some missing things there, but it's good enough. Set that aside, and then I started building this thing, and I got it done today. But the way they packaged it is you get the box, and then there's 4 boxes in it, and then in each box, the bags are numbered. And then the plans, it basically says, okay, you open bags 1 and 2, and then you start building these things up. I would, with sets, I usually just open everything and find all the parts that are similar, and then I would start pulling them together. With a set this huge, that just didn't work. I like the way they did the packaging. I thought that made a lot of sense, and it made it fairly simple to get through. So I'm not saying go out and buy this, but I had fun building it. It was a fun family thing to do with my boys, and it's now I just got to find a place to put it because it's pretty big. Now you just got to find a place to put it. All right, so next thing is a movie that I actually just watched tonight. It's called Backroads. I read the book first, and then I just looked it up and found out they made a movie with it, or a movie on it. And the movie is pretty faithful to the source material. It's not easy source material. It's basically a family of 4 kids. The son, who's I think 20, is basically got. He's the. I don't know what the right term is, but he's like the parent of the 3 girls, which are like 16, 12, and 6 or something like that. The story starts out that you find out that the mother shot the father. The father was physically abusive. Kidding. That's another thing with that tonight. Physically abusive to the family. So apparently she shot him, and now she's in jail, and he has to somehow keep this family alive by working 2 jobs and dealing with this in his head. And he goes and sees a shrink. He's obviously traumatized by a lot of things, but he can't deal with it because of all the other things he's responsible for. The movie does, there's some things it cuts out from the book, which again, when you have a medium of a movie and a book, or a book and a movie, blah, 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 they're different mediums. Sometimes, you will go into more detail or do different things, or you'll cut characters or whatever. You'll just never have a faithful word by word representation of a book into a movie. Just can't do that. So there were some things that were cut, but for the most part, it follows it pretty well. I won't say where it deviates, but it. I thought it was a good, decent movie. It's obviously not a heartwarming film. It's pretty dark at times, and it's not poorly acted by any stretch of the imagination. It's just so bleak, I think, is the right way for me to describe it. And the main character, in fact, all of them are pretty, messed up, for lack of a better phrase, and lost. And it's kind of disturbing in some cases with what goes on. So it's also interesting to see that the officer in the movie is played by one of the most notorious villains ever in film history, the T-1000. It's Robert Patrick, which it's like just seeing him now compared to what he was back in that movie. That character was so defining. I should talk about that someday. That movie, Terminator 2, and that character was just, I still remember the day I saw it in the theater. Awesome experience. But in any event, Backroads, it's not a pick-me-up movie. It's not going to make you feel really good about things, but I thought it was done well. Another movie I just saw is called Memory. It's got a tagline that I forget what it is, but it's not a documentary about Alien, but it's a discussion about the first Alien movie and philosophy behind it, and how the story came about and what it represents. And if you're a fan of Alien, you may want to watch it. I'm a big fan of Alien. I have this little, I don't know, Funkos or whatever they call them. Here, I'll scare you. There you go. I got that sitting there on my desk. So I'm a big fan. But yeah, if you're not, and I guess if you're really, really into like over-analyzing things like books or art or poetry or whatever, you might want to watch this. I just felt it did exactly that. It was getting, I think, reaching a bit too far in certain areas about what the movie represented and what the story entailed. Obviously Alien, I think, is one of the most important movies ever made. I think it was very groundbreaking and did a lot of things very, very well. I just thought this was a little bit too far. So unless you're a fan, I don't know if you'd get a lot out of it. Next thing is this book called The Reserve by Russell Banks. I read some of his books a long time ago. Affliction, The Sweet Hereafter, a couple of other ones. Those two were actually made into movies, which were good, at least from what I remember way back when. Maybe I should watch them again and see if my thoughts 20 or how many years from then to now are any different. But watched the movies and read the books, and I thought he's a magnificent author. Obviously writes really, really well. This book is basically about these families that live in this place called the Reserve, which I believe is in the Appalachian Mountains in the 1930s, after the Great Depression, right after. So you have these families that are fairly well-to-do with people in the area that are basically trying to find any kind of job. They focus more on the families, though that other aspect does come into play. And the story kind of starts with just, this family, mother and father, that have a daughter that's in her early to mid-20s, and then there's this other main family with one main character, and he's like an artist, and they kind of just get together. But then as the story goes on, you start to see these characters really kind of unravel and almost fall apart in a way with what you find out more and more about them. It's written well. Banks is a great author. So the way the book is structured, the writing is really, really good. I have no fault with that. I did find the story a little far-fetched at times. There's certain aspects to it that I just couldn't buy. And they were a little hard to really accept in some ways. Again, I don't want to spoil too much, but I actually thought I was going to, before I even read a page of it, I thought I was going to be bored of it. I really did. For some reason, I thought 1930s, the cover is like this, guy and a girl buy a car, and they're like, oh, they're happy, and I don't know. I just thought it was going to be almost like a romance novel, and it's not. It gets to be a little dark at times, to say the least. But it still wasn't something that quite gripped me. I basically wouldn't recommend it, heartily recommend it and say you must go out and buy this book and read it. But that doesn't mean it's bad either. So take that for what's worth. Last thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to do this in every monthly review, which is to leave the best for the last, is a movie that my wife and I saw on a date night. Typically, our date nights are like once a month. We go to dinner, and then we go see a movie. We went to see Knives Out. Loved it. Absolutely loved the movie. It's highly entertaining. I thought the characters, even though they are a little bit overblown, I think they fit the style of the movie really, really well. You have a lot of good actors in this movie. You've got Jamie Lee Curtis. God, what's her name? She was in Hereditary or Heredity. Is that the one? Oh my God, that movie was really, really good. Toni Collette. She was great in it. You've got Chris Evans. You've got God, I'm forgetting people's names. The 007. I will think of it later. I don't know. Daniel Craig. Okay, so you got a lot of good actors in this movie, and yes, they even call it out at the beginning. This is like a clue. Like the house is basically like a clue game, and it's definitely holding to that kind of style about you somebody gets murdered and who did it. I think it's more of why did it happen, and yeah, that's why you want to find the motive and everything, but it was a very interesting tale. It obviously is maybe a little bit far-fetched in some ways, but I didn't care. The movie is so entertaining. I was never bored with it. I always found that it was handled really well. And yes, you have to watch for everything. Everything matters. Just keep watching the details, and eventually, to me, it all comes together. Especially at the end. The end scene, I thought it harkens back to something you see right at the beginning, and I thought that was a nice touch. So, highly recommend watch that one. I definitely recommend. If you can see Knives Out, definitely go see it. So, all right, that's all the things I have for December 2019. Hopefully, this time when I record it, my audio and video don't go too far out of sync. But if it does, oh well, you're just going to have to deal with that, and I'm going to have to figure out what happened and fix that for the next one. So, thank you all for watching, and leave any comments and questions below. And I will do this in a month for January 2019. See you then. I said January 2019, didn't I? That's wrong. January 2020. We're going to skip ahead. Going to have to remember 2020. Okay, so January 2020. That's the next one coming out. So I will see you then.